Myra Hornbacher is an award-winning journalist and best-selling author. She is well known for her memoir, Wasted, a memoir of anorexia and bulimia, in which she discusses her challenges of her 14 battle with anorexia and bulimia. Can you tell us a little bit about your 14-year battle with anorexia and bulimia?
I can. I mean, it's a broad swath of time, and I never really know. I think everybody who asks me about my eating disorder has a different length of time. So I don't know what the official one that's on record of how long I had eating disorders was, but I did begin to struggle with it when I was about 9. Like many people do, I struggled with body dysmorphia long before that. Like as long as I can remember having a body, I was dealing with like weird embodiment stuff. But the eating disorder per se, the anorexia and bulimia, the symptoms of it really kind of took hold when I was 9. And my last hospitalization was 10 years later. I continued to kind of, the early years of recovery are really 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's not a linear process of recovery. So the years following my last hospitalization were still a little bit rocky at first. What I think about now, I mean, this is a long time ago, almost, oh God, how appalling. It's almost 30 years ago, which is wonderful. I mean, that's an amazing thing to be able to say. But what it feels like now is a different life, a different self. That, of course, is not totally true. But what I can tell you about those years of struggling with the disorder is that they were so consumed by fear that's what I remember about almost 15 years of my life, is that I was just terrified all the time. And that breaks my heart. I mean, it breaks my heart for people who struggle with those same symptoms, but also people who deal with any addictive behavior of any kind. You live in such terror all the time that you can't find joy. So the symptoms, they're the same. They were the same for me as they were for everybody else. I restricted, I binged, I purged, I compulsively did everything. I compulsively exercised, I compulsively restricted all that stuff. I think, when people who are not familiar with eating disorders experientially or in friends or family members hear about it, the gory details of the symptoms seem odd to them. Mm-hmm. But actually, eating disorders are like an extremely, it's a logical elaboration on an idea we're all dealing with, which is that I am too much, I take too much, I'm going to cut back. And with eating disorders, you just keep going back and back and back and back, and you really cut it back until there's nothing left of you or your life. And so when I think about eating disorders now, unlike someone who's closer to them, who has been close to them more recently than I have, more than 30 years ago, I think about it much more metaphorically now than I think probably someone does who's in the depths of it. And I think that maybe what I have to offer now is that years down the line, you're not worried about anymore what size pants you wear or how many calories there are in a stick of gum. I mean, that's irrelevant. Mm-hmm. But those used to be the kinds of questions that shaped my day. I mean, those were the biggest things in my life. And I'll tell you right now, we have a pandemic, we have riots. There are bigger things in my life now, and I'm glad of that. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I mean, an eating disorder, or just me with my own physical struggles, I mean, that's one part of us, but there are bigger problems, if you think about it in the grand scheme of things. Can you tell us about your recovery process?
I can, and that's the part that gets interesting to me. I mean, like, whenever you talk to any of us who deal with an ability and a difference at the same time, I always feel like people want to know the horror stories. They want to hear about the car crash of it. And there's kind of a gawking feeling to it. And I get that. But what's been interesting to me, maybe simply because it's more recent and it's been a longer part of my process, recovery is really interesting. Recovery goes through a lot of stages. The life cycles of a recovery process are many. There's lots of different phases of that. And so recovery in my early 20s is really different than recovery in my late 40s. I mean, it's a different human, it's a different world for that matter. So recovery at first for me was sheer stubbornness, and that worked. It was like, you sit down in this damn chair and eat your lunch. There's not going to be any arguing. And so then and now, the technique that I found was that I had to deal with myself as my own parent or my own wiser self. And so, years later, of course, you discover that's an old truism in Buddhism. I mean, this is not new to them. But for me, the idea of I don't have to live in a hospital. I don't have to be told how to eat. I know how. It's a matter of telling myself, getting that embedded in my own self and beginning to integrate that wiser self and those decision-making processes. And so that became the kind of the guiding principle of my recovery, was really just this sense that nobody's going to save me and nobody needs to. And that was really huge for me. It was recognizing being locked up wasn't going to do it. Being tied to a chair and force-fed was not going to do it. I was going to walk out and screw it up again, But when I got myself to say, what do you like to eat? And I realized I didn't know the answer. I had like no clue. It's like muffins. And then I realized, I haven't eaten anything but muffins in 10 years. That may be why I think I like them. When I realized I don't actually know how to cook, I don't know how to buy a grocery, I don't own any dishes. So like at a certain point you go, this is not functional. This is not efficient. This is not a way to live in the world. And so that became a big piece of my early recovery, was turning to friends and saying, how do you make soup? Like, just how do you buy clothes? How do you grocery shop for anything besides canned potatoes? Like, I just remember being like, I have no idea how to do this. And recognizing that, again, going back to Buddhism, that's really beginner's mind. There's a state of approaching life that really does become very, very healing. And also it allows you to kind of live in a state of discovery all the time. And so that allowed me to set aside some of that terror, that what's going to happen if I recover, and be like, what's recovery mean? What's it look like? How do I do it? So coming at recovery that way allowed me to ask friends, how do I do this? It allowed me to seek out supports. It allowed me to go back to work and start thinking about, like, what do I want to do? What do I want to be when I grow up? I was an adult by then, but like I'd been a full-time eating disordered patient for so long that going, what would I do with my time if I had all the time in the world to live? I was so young. I think about it now and I'm like, how could I have thought I didn't have time? I had all the time. Even now I feel like I've let time. So recovery at first was really about like just opening up the door and being like, you can do anything. What do you want to do? And just try it all out. And so recovery for me over time has gone through phases of, not phases so much, I guess I'll go as layers. Like at first it was just like, take the lid off this thing and see what happens. What happens if you're just free? And then getting down deeper into it, it mattered a lot to get to a recognition that therapeutic assistance was going to be big for me. Talk therapy has been really, really helpful for me over the years, still is. Many, many years into that, I'm still looking at stuff that I didn't know I even needed to look at. And that's fine. There's no rush. I, for myself, found that not only were eating disorders a thing for me, but basically any addictive process can snag me pretty easy. So I am a person who just realized very quickly that alcohol and drugs are not for me. It's not a judgment of like, those are good or bad. I do know that my body, though, my head, and whoever I am, I don't need any more, I don't need to pour gasoline on the fire. Let's put it that way. We'll just have the fire and kind of tend the fire, not make an explosion unnecessarily. So alcohol and drugs had to go for me. That was a big piece that was a lot of my late 20s and 30s. Getting that out of the way allowed me to find a lot of peace in my life. And from then until now, really, the process has been about developing creatively and intellectually and spiritually and deepening a sense of being alive and well in the world, regardless. I mean, difference is kind of immaterial. We're all quite different, so whatever my differences may be, I still get to, and I also still, I think, have a responsibility to deepen a spiritual practice, deepen a creative practice, deepen an intellectual practice for myself. And that has been recovery in an ongoing sense for me. That's what that's been about.
It's amazing. So now, have you gone to any like treatment centers, or was it just mainly talk therapy? And I apologize if I didn't get that when we were.
No problem. I was in and out of the hospital for eating disorders 11 or 12 times between
Oh, wow.
89 and I guess 93. So very, very short period of time. I was in the hospital almost full time. Since then, no, I've not been in eating disorder treatment. I did go to drug and alcohol treatment when I was, I don't know what, 26, I guess. So 20 years ago. That was really helpful, recognizing, oh, hey, I've been here before. I thought I had this down. Not so much with the having it down. And it was just like same addiction, different day, and that's really what the recognition was for me, was to realize I had sort of moved all those terrors and obsessions out of anorexia and bulimia and into drugs and alcohol. And when the drugs and alcohol were gone, then I could get to, why do I need the obsession? Why do I need the self-hatred? Why do I need the self-destruction? And then when I got to unpack that, I found I didn't need to anymore. And so like treatment, inpatient treatment has not been a piece of my own experience for a long time as a consumer. I've been a practitioner now for a long time, but I haven't felt it was I haven't needed that kind of support in a long time. It was definitely a piece of it though, to kind of again to interrupt that cycle.
Right. No, of course. Now, do you feel as if you're recovered from your eating disorder?
I do. And so I love the word recovery because it's so fraught. And we all have such different ideas of like, what does that mean? So like in the 12-step world, the idea of recovery is an ongoing thing. I hold to that in some sense, on a day-to-day basis. To me, recovery really is about the process. So recovered past tense, the ED there, on a day-to-day basis, I don't think about what I'm eating. I don't worry about my weight. I don't worry about my size. It's immaterial. Like that's not a guiding principle in my life. What I think about in terms of my body is, am I comfortable? Am I active? Am I flexible? I'm getting old. Come on, guys. I got to be worried about like my bones at this point. I'm not going to fuss around with like the size of my pants. So like my body stopped being an object that I was managing, and started being the animal that I am. And that was a really big transition and really critical for me to be okay with that. And then once I was okay with that, I began to really enjoy being in a body. I do a lot of yoga. I do a lot of hiking. I do stuff that really feels good to me. I lift a lot of weights, little teeny tiny weights, but weights nonetheless, so I started having a really different relationship with my body. And so in terms of like eating disorder behaviors, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. I can't even imagine the last time I purged or wanted to, like it just doesn't make sense anymore. Like why would I need to do that? In the same way that it doesn't occur to me to pick up a drink. It just doesn't, like, why would I blow everything out of the water because I felt like having a beer? That would be silly. Worked real hard to stay alive. I'm not going to blow it now,
No, of course. Absolutely. Now, from your book, Wasted, a memoir of anorexia and bulimia, what do you want readers to take away from your memoir?
That was written such a long time ago. It's hard to say now what I would want them to take away from it, because the world that book was written in doesn't exist anymore. That book was written before internet. So we didn't have the Google. We didn't have the interwebs. I did the research for that book in books, like physical books. I sat on the floor of my office in 1990 whatever and wrote the book out of my head. We had, I guess at that point, somewhere in there we got AOL, dial-up modems had AOL, so I could communicate with friends. It took 8 or 9 hours to send anything anywhere. But I mean, so like the stuff that I think young people grow up with now, that I don't envy them at all, the media pressures are really different than the media pressures we were dealing with. We were like, media then meant magazines and billboards. Like that was the media that was the big bad wolf that was kind of causing eating disorders and everything like that. That's garbage too. But the media that we now live with is like a virtual world where literally the body is almost fantastical. Like people have a virtual self. We have avatars. That's absurd.
Right.
And so like that pressure, I can't imagine having grown up with that. I mean, it was as bad as it got as a kid. It was only ever as bad as 17 magazine, I mean, in terms of external visual pressures. I don't know how people now grow up without eating disorders. I don't. And that kind of breaks my heart because I can't imagine being that divorced from a physical self, from a grounded reality of like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. You know, I had that to go back to when I recovered. I had a memory of a childhood self who was like, I'm going to dig in the dirt and I'm going to climb in the trees and it's going to be fine. Like, I didn't grow up with a sense of people watching me or approving or disapproving or liking or not liking or making a little happy face when I said something. It was just, life wasn't that. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question specifically, what do I want them to take away from it? I hope they take it as an artifact of an older time in one sense, but also to see that as far as we think we've come with feminism and gender awareness and sexuality awareness, we have not come that far. You know, those games we were playing with 17 magazine are now like writ large. I mean, that's the world on a grand scale now. So my hope is like, it's so long ago that my hope is that people would take from it. If you're reading this now and it's still pertinent, we have a long way to go. Like, that book should not even be relevant. We should have fixed this a long time ago. That book should be long out of print, and it's not. So.
Okay. Amen to that. So since you've recovered, what have you, like, where has your life taken you since?
Everywhere, all over the place. I've had the most amazing life so far. It's just been a miracle. And I say that because I feel lucky to be alive, you know, in a lot of ways. My life has been nothing but interesting. And I think, you know, people are always like, oh, your life's been so hard. And I'm literally like, what are you talking about? My life is fascinating all the time.
Right.
That doesn't make it easy, but anybody who has a difference of any kind is aware that there is both difficulty and interest in that. Like, if we all were neurotypical and had the same body and had the same ability, well, we'd all be the same person, and then we wouldn't learn anything ourselves. We wouldn't learn how to handle anything. There wouldn't be any new work being done creatively or intellectually or politically or socially. Like, nothing would change, and that would be boring. So life has been, I mean, you know, since then I've written 4 other books. I'm finishing another book now. I've written, hundreds of articles, dozens of essays. I'm finishing another long form nonfiction book. And I just finished a collection of essays. Those come out in the next couple of years. I've been married. I've had amazing friends. I'm about to adopt a child.
Congratulations.
That's exciting. I mean, like, beyond exciting, because I'm 46. Like, I was like, no kids for me. And then one day I was like, you know, this kid for me. And so that's really exciting. And
so where are you adopting from? And I mean, this doesn't have to be on the interview. Don't worry.
No, it's actually real interesting. This is a young woman who she's actually an adult, and we started talking. She's 24.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
I've been a kind of a mentor friend of hers since she was in high school. And she was kind of a lost little being. And over the years, we've just really kind of bonded, and I just adore her. I have no kids of my own, and I called her the other day. We talk almost every day, and I basically been kicking her in the butt for 10 years and saying, you know, get it together. We will not be having eating disorders. We will not be having drug addiction. You're going to get together and get a job. You know, come on, pull it together. And that's not to judge. It's that I see what she's capable of. And she said to me the other night, she said something so much. She goes, why do you always know how to do things? And I go, because I did it wrong like 47 times and you don't have to. You know, it's just like, right. Save yourself the time. And so the other day I called her. I was like, can I adopt you? Like, is that a legal thing we can do? And she goes, yeah, you can. And I wanted to ask you, but I thought it'd be weird. I was like, no, let's do it. So I feel like.
How old is she?
She's 24. And
so she's 24. You had mentioned that. Okay.
Yeah. It's like a matter of like, when I'm old and ancient, somebody will need to pull the plug on me, and I'm not going to have a kid to do it. So we laughed about that. And then, you know, it's a matter of also legality and everything like that. I will be her person when something happens, when something financial happens. I'm there to back her, whatever.
Does she have parents? Well, she has parents,
As
obviously.
biological parents, there's been a difficult relationship for many, many years with them, and they've been estranged for a long time. And so that's how she kind of floated into my life with no grounding 10 years ago. And I was like, we need to get you grounded. Let's make this happen. So I kind of knew when I was younger that I was not going to have. I knew when I was younger that I was not going to have children of my own, but I also kind of had this sense that when I got older and got steadier in my own life, that there might be enough heart room left over to share. And so that's kind of how that's evolved. So, I've traveled all over the world. I teach full time. I'm a journalism and creative writing professor at the University of Nebraska. It's like, it's never dull. It's never dull.
It's amazing. And I'm actually really, really excited about this adoption journey of yours. I mean, I know that she's 24 years old, and so it's a little bit different, but you've known her for 10 years plus, and it's really, really exciting. So anyways, I look forward to hearing more about that
Cool. I'll probably write about it. Chances are good.
Yeah, you should. All right. So what do you think about the culture of women specifically, and eating disorders?
I think, now that we're getting a little bit less binary in terms of our sense of gender and sexuality, I think that will help us open the conversation a bit to include female identified people who are not born gendered female, and young men who have dealt, not just young men, but men who have dealt with eating disorders, because there are a lot of them, a whole lot of them. That said, specifically to your question, the cultivation of eating disorders and the perpetuation of eating disorders is pretty much on our heads as women. The fact that I can walk into any kind of social dynamic and someone somewhere is talking about who's lost weight and who hasn't. And I'm so bored of it. Like, who cares at this point? It's so beyond silly to me. I love it when I haven't seen people for years and they see me and they're like, you look like you've lost weight. I'm like, please just, can you have what are you reading? Like, what have you done for 2 years? Don't congratulate me on my shirt. This is silly. And so the substance of our relationships, especially as hetero cis women, has been so bound up in, do I look right? Do I look like I match the other Barbie set? And I don't. Never did. Never gonna. And so why am I constantly trying to default myself to look away when I don't even necessarily think that's the way I want to be? And so women, especially cis women who really have been given lots of opportunities to do other things with our lives, the fact that we keep getting sucked into, and I think also perpetuating the centrifuge, let's call it, of body obsession and body dysmorphia really bums me out. I didn't go through the 90s with my head shaved for young women now to be like, I need to lose weight. That's not why we did that. That's not why we worked as hard as we did. That's not why women in the 60s and 70s worked for us to be able to say what we wanted to say and get the education and the work we wanted to get. So I don't like to be the hard ass, but I am the hard ass. And it really frustrates me that women now are like, oh, I don't think I'll be a feminist. And I'm like, right. Okay, so how's that going to work? Are we going to get anywhere without some element of that? And the eating disorders and the body dysmorphia and the body obsession and the beauty mythology, to go back to Naomi Wolf's wonderful old book, The Beauty Myth, that whole mythology about how beauty is a thing and it is of value by definition, it's a value in itself, is garbage. And we're still acting as if it's really a thing. So I think women in particular, not solely, but certainly women, really need to kind of fess up that we're complicit in this. I mean, we can talk about how awful it is to live in a culture where we are put upon and there's bad things that happen. That is true. And it is also true that we feed it. There's that wonderful old, it's apocryphal, but the story of, the wolf you feed. If you don't know that story, anybody listening to this, look it up. There are two wolves in this old story. And why is one stronger than the other? Well, that's the wolf that got fed. And so if we keep feeding this wolf that consumes our lives and our attention with such consistency, and then we wonder why that wolf is bigger and stronger than the other wolf, it's a very short conversation. So.
Right.
We need to look at that.
For sure. Now, what would you like others to understand about eating disorders that you did not understand or know when you went through this process and journey?
That's my favorite question ever. I love that question because it gives me the chance to say this. Every time I get a letter about eating disorders, email, text, whatever message, I get them all the time, like couple hundred a week. I mean, people are still writing me the same phrase. I know I will always struggle with this to some extent. And I'm like, who's pressing play on this auto response? I mean, like, why, who told you that? And then I realized, oh, that's what they told me too. You will always deal with this to some extent. Like, it's you enter the sort of revolving door of treatment world there, and they say, well, you may recover, but you'll always deal with this to some extent. I fully bought that. And so when Wasted came out in 98, the epilogue is like, I know I'll always deal with this to some extent. And so in 2014, when I wrote the revision to the epilogue, or the new epilogue, whatever it was, I was like, no, that's a decision you get to make. You want to deal with it for the rest of your life? Okay, that's cool. You can. You don't actually have to. You do need to make the decision, though, to walk away from this sort of incredibly enabling, this unbelievably frustratingly the idea of learned helplessness is important here. Anyone with different abilities needs to think about that, and we need to talk about it more. It's like, to what extent am I buying into this idea of I can't? I can't. Well, if somebody's telling me you can't, I probably won't. Unless I'm one of those really obstreperous people, which it turns out I am. So now I get to come back and say, if you're one of those people who really buys into I can't, I'm wounded, I'm broken, I'm this, blah, 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 blah. And now that gives me a great reason to go back and not work on it because I can't. Why would I bother? Well, that's enabling. What I thought when I started recovery from eating disorders is that I would always deal with it to some extent. That's garbage. I have not. I dealt with it, and then I didn't have to deal with it anymore. Had I bought into I'll always deal with this to some extent, I'd still be there. And I'm not having to deal with that. And I'm both grateful, but I'm also grateful that somebody who didn't have an eating disorder is like, why aren't you eating? And I was like, I don't have an answer for that. Because like every time you talk to somebody with an eating disorder who's really active in it, and they're like, you don't understand. And there's part of me that wants to go, no, honey, you don't understand. There's no reason for you to be doing this. You are doing this because something hurts. Let's call a spade a spade. Deal with what hurts. Don't tell me you can't eat. You can.
For sure. Now, what advice, and you spoke a little bit about this, but what advice would you give to others?
I heard the most wonderful phrase the other day in a 12-step meeting where somebody was like, how you always find the people in your life who will co-sign your I was like, oh, we do. We find those people who are like, oh yeah, do that, Marya. That's a great idea. As you like spin out and like crash your car again. And they're like, geez, I hate how that happens. Those are people we don't need. The people who co-sign are the ones we need to watch out for. People who challenge us. That's what I want to talk to people with eating disorders about, is like people who pad the edges for you, and people who tell you you will always deal with this to some extent, and people who say it's okay to walk away from recovery because you believe you will never recover. Those are not people who are helping you live. They're people who are helping you stay stuck. And so I'm not cuddly that way. I'm not going to be the mom who like lets you sit on her lap and pats you on the back. I'm going to be the woman out there who's like, you can walk away from this. It's really up to you. So not everybody wants to hear that, and not everybody's in a spot to hear that. And I get that. And I fully respect that we're where we're at, right? Not to end a sentence with a preposition, but I just did. There are amazing practitioners who will help people with the grief and the trauma. There are amazing friends who can be a little further along the recovery path than you are, that you follow them. What I want people who deal with this stuff, not just eating disorders, but any kind of addictive processes, what I want people to think about is, who do you want to be when you're on the other side of this? Because you want to be on the other side of this. Do you want to be the person out there who's like, I feel sorry for all those little girls, or do you want to be the people who are like, yeah, that was a long time ago. I moved on with my life. And that's your call. I mean, people get to make that decision. It's not like I deal with other differences. I have bipolar disorder. That's not something I get to walk away from particularly. It's a blessing that you can walk away from an eating disorder. You can. I'd love to walk away from bipolar. That's not going to happen this week. I can, however, now that I'm out of the eating disorder, now that I'm out of the addictions, I can look at the bipolar difference and be like, how do I maximize the gifts this gives me? How do I make this work for myself? But when you're playing in the, in the sandbox with self-destructive stuff, you can't move on. That keeps you stuck forever. So what I want to say to people who have issues with eating and dysmorphia is like, you'll stay there as long as you want, but when you're ready, you can walk out.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And since you brought, I mean, we cover mental health too, but, and I know we spoke about this a little bit when I scheduled our interview, but would you like to just discuss a little bit about your bipolar disorder and kind of when it started, how you manage it, and because you're so well known, so I know others would love to hear.
I love it that I have found much more growth within the community here of people who deal with differences than I have in treatment settings. That doesn't mean treatment isn't helpful, doesn't mean it isn't necessary at times, but the real growth, the long-term recovery, the long-term growth is talking one-to-one, with other people who have been dealing with differences a long time and finding strategies of their own. And so with bipolar, when I wrote Madness, which was, quite a long while back, but when I wrote it, I was just beginning to kind of get a handle on the active cycle of mania and depression. I've not been hospitalized for mania or depression in like 15 years. It's been a long, long time. And at that time, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I thought I will always deal with this to some extent, blah, blah, blah. And probably in this case, because it's a biologically driven or more biologically driven than the addictive processes, to some extent, I'll always deal with moody, but like my psych chart now says moody. That's what it says. Like there's no sort of like diagnostic code. There's just like, she's a little moody and she smokes a lot. So, I mean, it could be a lot worse. And with bipolar, the way I manage it, I mean, the number one thing I do is I don't add chemicals to it. And again, with the gasoline and the fire, it's a fire. Don't blow things up with it. I mean, the mind is the mind. And it's I'm trying to remember I think it was Rethke who wrote, the mind has fathoms deep. And it does, it's not an unvolatile substance. And so I feel like learning to deal with one's mind, whatever it is, whatever its variations on a theme may be, you learn the one you've got pretty well if you try. You can also make a mess with it. You can really make a mess with it, so like over the years, managing mine has been to, the first and foremost thing is to get the chemicals out of it. Like don't add to the problem. Don't exacerbate the issues and maximize the strength.
You do not take medication?
I do take one medication now, but I'm no longer taking the other 9 that they had me on.
Okay.
So like, I mean, pharma being what it is, there are many physicians who are very, very pro polypharmacy. That's fine for who it works for. Statistically, the science behind medication doesn't bear out that is a more successful strategy for most people than one medication or no medication. I mean, like, so most people who need medication don't need 9 medications. That's the fact of it. So that's a project for another day, but there's a lot of really interesting research on how much more effective than medication alone things like sleeping are. I mean, like the best research right now being done on management of mood and thought disorders is on sleep, exercise, meditation, mindfulness, all this stuff that's really undramatic and also not profitable, which, again, a conversation for another day. But like when I realized that my illness was creating an ongoing profit source for companies that I didn't know and didn't necessarily want to support, I went, wait, what are the What is their investment in me staying sick? Well, a couple $1 million a year right out of my, insurance's pocket. That's what their investment in me staying sick is. So what if I try all these other strategies? So like when people say, do you take medication or don't you take medication? I do take medication. Not everybody I know in recovery does. Not everybody I know in recovery needs it. Not everybody I know in recovery uses only medication. In fact, nobody I know in really long-term recovery is just taking a med. I don't know anybody who's finding success with just that strategy. So what the people I see who are recovering are doing is sleeping, eating, not drinking and doing drugs. It just doesn't help. In fact, it's really counterproductive. Getting exercise and meditating. And would that it were more dramatic, would that there were a quick fix and a magic bullet, but there's really not. Those are the things that seem to be working.
For sure. I totally agree. I mean, I do therapy, I do exercise, I take my medication. Meditating is something that's very difficult for me, but definitely something that I need to learn more.
It's a lifesaver. I mean, really a lifesaver. Like it allows you to take that moment. If all you do is a minute or two a day, it trains your brain and it trains you kind of cognitively, not just the body brain, not the neurology, not just the neurology, but it trains you to detach from the emotions. So like when you're describing those spirals of anxiety, I have a little meditation app that has like emotional SOS meditation.
Oh, you mean Headspace?
No, it's Insight Timer. So all it does is like, 2 minutes, it talks me through detach from the spiral. Don't feed the spiral. Just watch the spiral. Then you can watch it go away. And that's a technique that nobody tells you about in the psych ward, essentially. I mean, they may now, but they didn't used to. Now they may. Maybe it's different now.
Yeah. No, I don't know. So anyways, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much, Myra.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Absolutely.